So, welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Harriet Frew, Eating Disorder Therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So, today I have a guest on the show who has guested many, many times before. And firstly, back in 2020, when this podcast was a baby. So, Joanne Moscalu, the Binge Eating Dietitian. Now, Joanne, is originally from Ireland, but is now local to me, just down the road in Cambridge. Joanne Moscalu is a specialist eating disorder dietitian, researcher, and writer. Her work focuses on binge eating, combining clinical practice, research, and thoughtful writing to challenge misconceptions and encourage more compassionate conversations about our relationship with food. So, Jo is the host of the Binge Eating Dietitian podcast and recently defended her doctoral thesis exploring the lived experience of binge eating. So, Jo has recently started sharing her writing on these subjects, and you can subscribe to her work, and the link will be in the show notes. So, do go and check that out. So, today, Jo is here to talk all about binge eating and to share some of her wonderful insights from her recent thesis, this mammoth piece of work. So, Jo's thesis is about her lived experience, not treatment or prevention of EDs, but what it's actually like to live with binge eating in the modern day world. And as a dietitian, she focuses on the dietitian's role and how we can maximize it for care of binge eating disorder and how this is currently wildly underutilized. Jo is also going to talk about binge eating disorder as a biopsychosocial condition, and yet the social side is often underlooked. Jo's thesis explores the significance of these social elements, so it'd be good to hear more about this. And Jo has publications in the pipeline, and as we've said, she started sharing her ideas on a new platform, which you can subscribe to, so please do subscribe, and the link again will be in the show notes. So welcome, Jo, to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Thank you, Harriet. It's so nice to be back. Thank you for having me.
Okay, no, brilliant. And we were saying before we started that you've got your leopard print uniform on.
Mhm. Of course.
Of course. So thank you. So Jo, you've just finished your thesis, or you
Mhm.
just come into the final points of that. So how long has it taken to do this thesis?
Had my very first session, my very first lecture back in January 2021. And I just had my thesis defense last week. So what's that, 5.5 years?
Yeah,
It's been a long
gosh.
road.
So have you maintained your enthusiasm and motivation throughout, or has it been an up and down ride?
It's been an up and down ride. Of course, I'm always enthusiastic about binge eating. I love talking about binge eating, but anyone who's ever done research will know that the process is very up and down, peaks and troughs, creating a new knowledge in any space, in any field. It's very unsettling. It's very anxiety inducing. You feel like, and I think every researcher will relate to this, you feel like you're doing it all wrong and that nothing is working out and it's all against you. And the only solution to that is to keep on going. And eventually you do get to a point where something clicks and you just step back and you're like, oh, I actually see that I've done something here and it's speaking to me now. So looking back, like when I look at my thesis now and I reflect on it for the last 5 years, I can see that it looks kind of easy now what I've done. It looks very straightforward and linear and methodical, but actually getting to that point, it's excruciating. There's no other way to describe it. It's a really tough process. Um, the only thing that really got me through is my obsession with the topic, and really that was what pushed me to keep on going because I genuinely wanted to know more and learn more and was so curious about the topic that that's what kept me going. But yeah, to any researcher who's done anything like this, what you're experiencing is completely normal and just keep on going.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that's pretty encouraging to some people listening who might be feeling in the depths of their studying at the
Yeah.
moment. And I'm just thinking that, you've also had two children in this time
Mhm.
period. Yeah. So,
What a time.
so and has that been, how has that all worked out? Like, has that been sort of like, has it been a helpful kind of counterbalance, or has it just been like a nightmare juggle, or all of those things?
For me, it was a blessing in a sense. But I think luck played into it somewhat because the doctorate that I did, firstly, it was part-time, which meant I had up to 8 years to finish it, which does make it seem a bit more manageable. Like, okay, I have a quite a long period of time to finish this. Did it in 5.5, which is good going, but I had up to 8 years. And also because it was part-time, a lot of the lectures they were online and I could kind of go through things at my own pace. I also started it during COVID where things were generally just a lot more flexible. So it really worked out for me. It was another big important feature actually is that it was self-funded, so I paid for it myself, which is a real privilege to do. It cost maybe about £12,000. So not nothing like that is a lot of money, but I felt like I was able to afford that investment so that I could have the flexibility. And I didn't have supervisors kind of watching over my every move. It was very self-directed. And my supervisors and the other lecturers and professors, they were all there as a support for me rather than me being accountable to them. So for me, it really fit in with raising children, and I really enjoyed when you're in the depths of parenting and singing nursery rhymes and providing meals and pureeing weaning foods and doing all the things to then be able to just spend 30 minutes in the evening working on your brain on a subject that I'm so passionate about really just added to my life. I always said to myself, though, if it did ever get too much, if I did ever feel like I couldn't manage it, then I would just step away. And I wouldn't beat myself up for that because I have put myself in a situation where I'm in demand in lots of different areas. And I needed to be really good to myself if I felt like I couldn't do it. And that was probably a good thing because it meant there's no pressure. I can step away if I want, but I'm choosing to do it.
Yeah, sounds like you got into a really peaceful, constructive mindset there, didn't you, as you approached
Mm.
it? Um,
Yeah, and I appreciate that's not always possible for people doing doctorates, PhDs. You do have supervisors down your neck. If you're being paid a stipend by the university, it's another person that you're responsible to. Whereas I didn't have that. So anyone who's thinking about doing a doctorate and you're afraid of that kind of subscribing to, being part of a lab and, having to produce for people, think about it part-time. And if you can self-fund it or you can seek outside funding, that is possible too. But just know that those options are available.
yeah, they're really interesting and helpful to hear.
Mm. Yeah.
So, Joe, say a bit more about your thesis. So, it's about lived experience
Yeah.
rather than actual treatment or research, whatever. So, obviously, you've
Yeah.
got your own lived experience,
Mhm.
but is this your experience and many others? Do you sort of conduct interviews, or how did it work?
Yeah, so no, it wasn't about my experience. I parked that. That wasn't important in this piece of work. What I did was with as with any research, you look in the literature and you see what gaps are there and where there hasn't been much research so far. And binge eating generally is really understudied. There's actually not that much research on binge eating at all across any discipline, which is quite interesting in a way, considering it's probably the most common eating disorder worldwide. So I was looking through the research, thinking about what I can study, and there was this very notable gap in lived experience research, which means really asking people who struggle with binge eating, what is it actually like? What's it like for you? What's it like for the knock-on impact on your life, your quality of life, your relationships? And I thought this is actually perfect. This is something that I can help to answer. I like you, I have an Instagram platform, lots of people follow me. I have an audience there of people who are struggling with this behavior that I can ask. So that's what I did. So I did conduct interviews. I conducted 11 interviews way back in 2023 into 2024, so a long time ago now, and kept them very open-ended. Really was asking the question what is life like for you struggling with binge eating? And something I found just truly fascinating that I couldn't ignore was that most people didn't speak about like, oh, so when I binge, like I'm standing at the press and I'm shoveling food in and I'm going back and forth and I'm driving to the shops and I'm you know Googling how to stop binge eating and people didn't talk about actually them in their binge eating. They didn't talk about their experience themselves. A lot of people spoke about how shameful that they felt because of how society makes binge eating out to be. Such a shameful behavior, it's so taboo in today's world. You would never dare to speak to someone about your binge eating. Whereas you might feel comfortable talking about other things in your life that are also a bit shameful, but never would you begin to mention your binge eating. And that's where people spoke about most. It was how other people made them feel or how they felt in the world. Maybe growing up, comments they got from parents, from peers, people talking about how they, were doing ballet and someone would comment on their body saying that they looked fat and that always stuck with them. So across 11 interviews, most people spoke about the world around them and how that impacts them as someone who struggles with food. And then I was like, obviously, this sounds like it's a very linear process, but it wasn't like this. But I could start to see this pattern. And I brought it to my supervisors and I said, like, people are not speaking about actually themselves, they're speaking about the world around them. And my supervisors were two amazing people and they were so encouraging. They said, okay, go and read around that then. Like, what is to be said about binge eating in society? And I looked in the research and there's basically nothing. I was like, but how is there nothing? Because all eating disorders are biopsychosocial conditions. So the social side is just wildly untheorized. Okay, another big gap to fill. So all my findings are related to society and the impact that has on people with binge eating, how we relate to each other, relate to the world, how the language we use can be stigmatizing and shameful and add to the whole experience that makes you just want to live under a rock when you struggle with binge eating. Truly, truly fascinating.
Gosh. Yeah, well, it sounds like, I mean, I already like, I think, I know before we came online and on the call, and I was saying to you, gosh, I would never want to do research or a thesis or anything. But I think just even beginning to hear you talk about it and like doing these 11 in-depth interviews and being able to really like get into the juice and the depth of people's experience. That sounds like fascinating actually. And I think it's so interesting that it was more about the world around them and rather than, like you say, people talking about their own personal experience of what it was like living with the disorder, really sort of highlighted the loneliness and the isolation and the shame.
Yeah. Yeah, people were far quicker to speak about the world around them rather than actually what was going on in their own world, in their own, like in the moment when it was happening. So yeah, you can see why the fascination, it kept me going. It was really interesting. I also honed in on people, on women specifically, and women in Ireland. I decided to focus there for a few reasons. Not because the experience in Ireland is any different to like the UK or the US or anywhere, because it's not. It's pretty similar. But I just know like Ireland, being from there, that's where I experienced binge eating too. I know that close-knit community feeling and vibe, it's kind of socially acceptable to talk about other people in a sense and like comments about weight and what you're eating and being good. It's all very much heightened in Ireland. It does exist here too, but it is noticeable there. So that was another strand, I guess.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I can understand your own just connection, I guess, wanting to do it with your
Yeah.
homeland and just, yeah, I think that's, I'm thinking about some of the clients that I've seen from Ireland actually, and also like the religious kind of roots
Yeah.
and yeah, that has quite an
Yeah.
influence, doesn't it? And I think like you're saying about those quite close-knit communities and
Mhm.
I think there's lots of things that are kind of they're universal, but they're also quite unique,
Yeah.
perhaps, to
Yeah,
some of those.
exactly. Yeah, like the
Yeah.
moralization of food, being good,
Mm.
don't waste anything. I didn't go into this in my thesis. It was a bit too much, but like people would say like, oh, we have generational trauma from the famine, from the potato famine, or you know, women's bodies were moralized with like mother and baby homes, which only closed in Ireland. Like the last one closed in 2001, so it's really quite recent. So there is a lot to unpick there. You do need to do an individual thesis for every single one of those issues, though. So I didn't bring that in too much, but I recognized it was there and it was like an underpinning current, I suppose, in my research.
To say a bit more then about some of these kind of things, the social factors that came up from your
Yeah.
thesis.
Yeah. The role of the family was a big one. The role of, the and I'm sure like, you recognize this being a therapist, like I'm sure a lot of what you do is talking about the family, but really the implications of how parents spoke to their children when they were younger, and kind of creating that kind of moral ground for their bodies from such a young age. Mothers dieting themselves and young children watching their mother's diet and then carrying on those behaviors as they go through. That was a big one. Um, and how that relates to society is because, okay, families are, yes, the nuclear environment where we all live or we grow up within. It's a practical thing, but it's all family is also a social issue. Um, because not an issue, but a social facet, I suppose, because like I don't want to get too deep into it here, but like societal norms are kind of governed through your family, or at least it can be perceived that way. So societal norms like your body has to be a certain weight and shape, and that's kind of what society says. But then your family and your caregivers kind of replicate those norms and bring them into your household then. So it's like the family is like a site of where this kind of normalization of body happens. So that was a big one that came up that a lot of people spoke about was like being raised in with that kind of, I guess you could say, like diet culture from such an early age, how it was brought into the home and their body was kind of put at the center of it. What else? Let me think. So a really interesting one was about the word binge. And this term is so loaded. And I don't think we ever stop to really reflect on that as practitioners about just how loaded it is. So part of my work is looking at that word and why that word? Like you might have heard compulsive overeating has been used to describe binge eating, or well, yeah, that's kind of the main one is compulsive overeating. But yet that word is not used in the DSM-5. It's the word binge eating disorder is used. That term is heavily stigmatized. It's associated with excess, with drinking, with drugs, with illicit behavior. And yet this term is in the DSM-5, such a highly respected manual that so many treatments are drawn from. And yet that term itself is one that people like just feel shame from just being associated with it. It does make you stop to think, why was that term used? I don't have any real answers for
Mm.
that. People with binge eating disorder are already usually in bigger bodies. They're already feeling that side of this of stigma and shame. And now adding in an extra facet to it by adding in the word makes you think.
It really does, doesn't it? And I think like language is so important, isn't it? And I sort of think about other
Really?
diagnoses, like particularly something like borderline personality disorder or something. Like I just think that's just
Hmm.
such a I just think who on earth ever came up with that? It's
Yeah.
it really kind of exacerbates the shame, doesn't it? For something that's
Yeah.
already where you're feeling very lonely and isolated, you can just feel like it's laden on even more.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. And it's just when, because say some participants would say things like, oh yeah, like I've read the DSM-5 criteria and I meet every single one. And to me, it feels great to see that it's there in black and white and that it's a legitimate thing, but I'm not going to ever tell anybody that this is what I'm struggling with because it just feels so shameful. So that was something that came out. Healthcare professionals as well came up a bit, especially with the not really understanding binge eating and feeling kind of fobbed off with like, just stop eating or just get it under control or just, do this and do that and really just not understanding that it is a legitimate eating disorder and really everything that comes along with it. And healthcare professionals kind of are doing a little bit more harm than good in those situations. Um, Not through their own fault as such. It's just because it's been sidelined as an eating disorder, hasn't it? And other eating disorders take the shining spot, really. So,
Definitely. And I think it's just not joined up, is it? I sort of think about some of my clients that perhaps also have type 2 diabetes, or maybe they're
mhm.
under another service, and they're very much told one set of advice and rules from, one service,
Yeah.
aren't they? And it's not really joined up with the eating disorder, or the eating disorder is often not really taken seriously or
Not at
acknowledged. Or
all.
maybe it's just not even, like you're sort of saying, it sounds like some of your people that you interviewed, they were just living with it completely on their own. They weren't even perhaps telling people at all that they were
Oh, yeah.
struggling.
No, no. And I should say that my participants were all undiagnosed. They'd never sought a diagnosis or never got treatment. And that was really important to me to focus on those women because why haven't you sought a diagnosis? Why haven't you sought a treatment? Um, in Ireland, there is a specialist eating disorder service. It's nationwide, and it's only been established in the last maybe 6 years or so. But in 2024, there was 10 diagnoses of binge eating disorder made nationwide. 2025, there was 15. So there's a real gap between how many are actually struggling versus how many get a diagnosis and why.
Gosh, that's incredible, actually. So,
Mhm.
so every one of these 11 people that you interview, so no one has actually sought help or had sought help when you were speaking
No,
to them. No.
no, no. And it
And
was like a contradiction if they had. Mm.
yeah, okay. And was it sort of were they kind of were their ages like dispersed across, were they sort of adults?
Adults, yeah, all adults, and yeah, all different ages from like 20s up to 60.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
interesting. So,
Mm.
I mean, I just think it's baffling, isn't it, to think like 10 people and then 15 people diagnosed in Ireland, so just so
Hmm.
recently. So, what were the main kind of barriers? And was there just not a service even really in Ireland before that? Like, would it even not, would they even recognize that they were struggling with an eating disorder?
Yeah, well, this is it. Like that. So why are so few people getting diagnosed? Yes, you're right. There are no services. Like, well, it's a bit better now with the new eating disorder service, but there really was not much to offer. Binge eating was just so poorly understood and recognized. And even in my thesis, I referenced this study. Now it's from 2016, so it's from a while ago, but um, they interviewed different professionals like GPs, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, dietitians, and only a handful of them were able to recognize binge eating disorder. And when you can think about it, these are all mental health professionals who should have been able to and just weren't. So it sounds like professionals aren't recognizing it. The person themselves is also not recognizing it. And they're, very quick to blame themselves. Like, I should be able to get on top of this. Maybe I'll go and look for some like weight loss support or weight management. Very, because binge eating disorder is so poorly understood, it's just not that people don't have the tools to be able to recognize this for themselves. It's only when they come across like platforms like yours or mine or, do a bit of Googling around it that they realize actually this is a legitimate thing. But no, there's certainly like what we have here in the UK is far more developed than what there is in Ireland. Those self-help programs and I think I think no matter where you go in the UK now, if you say that you're struggling with a binge eating disorder, there will be a service available for you to tap into.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
interesting. So I guess in a way, like your research is going to be even more groundbreaking in some respects, isn't it? You've really put a spotlight on Ireland. And
Mm.
potentially, I guess, it sounds like things are shifting there, but it's a real opportunity, isn't it, in a way, for much more awareness to be,
Yeah.
given towards it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and have people tried to seek out, it sounds like people didn't realize they had binge eating disorder, but were they sort of trying to seek out like diet plans, or were they like looking for some sort of solution, but perhaps in the wrong places, maybe?
Oh yeah, completely. Like trying the
Hmm.
diets, trying GLP-1s, trying self-help even. We're like trying to do something, but not specifically for binge eating.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And can I just ask just a tangent question, actually, because I just
Sure.
think quite interested in your dietetic perspective on the whole GLP ones and binge eating. I know it's a huge topic, but can you just give us a little bit of your kind of overview, your perspective on, yeah, the benefits? And because I know for some people, GLPs are quite helpful with binge
Hmm.
eating, but then I know I'm working with quite a lot of people in the therapy room at the moment that have been on the GLPs for a bit and then come off, and now the food noise has returned and it's
Yeah.
exacerbated the problem. So, what are your thoughts on that? Just as a little tangent.
My thoughts on that are GLP-1s are not licensed for binge eating disorder, at least not right now. I would not be surprised if they are going to be licensed soon. But right now, they are not approved for treatment of binge eating. And that's for a very good reason. And I really hope that they're not going to be licensed. I'm saying it, I think it's going to happen, but I really hope it doesn't because exactly what you're describing. Yes, there have been some anecdotal reports that they are helpful to stop the food noise, to stop that out of control eating behavior. And I'm completely like holding space for that. And I recognize that that's some individuals' experiences and that's completely valid. But there's not enough discussion about what happens afterwards. And people have to come off GLP-1s for a whole range of reasons. Like even talking about Ireland again, like I'm not entirely sure, but they're not as widely available on the public health service as they are available here. It's a massive cost, like 300, 400 euros a month. Like it's huge. So I would just take extreme caution with if you wanted to try them, firstly know that they're not licensed for binge eating disorder. And if you do decide, well, I'm going to just try them anyway, please have an exit strategy. Just be prepared for when you come off them that that food noise is going to come back with an absolute vengeance and it's going to feel awful when you maybe have lost some weight and now you just cannot stop eating and you're like grasping onto this weight loss again, grasping on trying to keep that weight loss and it's just bringing you right back to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah,
So, say a bit more, Joe, about the role for dietitians in supporting people with binge eating disorder or binge
yeah,
eating generally.
sure. So another facet of my thesis was because I'm a dietitian, I really wanted to highlight our role in treating binge eating because binge eating disorder is a mental health issue. It's a mental health disorder, but it's very much driven, all the treatments are driven by psychology, psychiatry, counseling, therapy, like exactly what you do. And it's incredible work that you do in that space and in those mental health professionals do. However, this is where I come in.
Yeah,
A big part of binge eating recovery is the actual practical food side of things. And
I
you can
agree.
talk, yeah, you can talk all day about like the things that you talk about, like childhood stuff and bigger life problems and depression and anxiety and all those things, which are very important. But if you are doing that work and still trying to eat 800 calories a day or not eat carbs after six or cut out chocolate and only have it at Easter, like your progress is going to be really scuppered. And again, going to the research and doing that full literature review, like psychiatry and psychology are way up here, and dietetics has just been completely sidelined when it comes to treatment of binge eating. In the NHS, there's no dietetic input at all actually for binge eating disorder. It's all done by psychology and therapy with self-help manuals. And then you have to ask the question, are now I know that you are because you've done amazing like postgraduate work, but are therapists qualified to talk about those food issues, that food side? Generally, no. And that's okay. Like it's okay that we have our own different lanes. Um, if a client is asking like, okay, well, how many grams of carbohydrates should I have in a day? Like a therapist is not equipped to answer that question. It's just not your field. And I think it is wrong that dietetics is not up there with psychology, at least on the same par when it comes to treatment of binge eating. Because I see it from my own work that I've done now exclusively for the last 6 years, that like the diet stuff is so important and it's almost the missing piece. People have done therapy for years but just feel like they still cannot get a handle on it. So a big part of my work with my thesis was just trying to raise that profile and show what dietetics, how dietetics can complement that side. But we've a long way to go, but it's good to get the conversation started.
It really is. And I think about actually when I worked in Cambridge for the NHS in the Adult Eating Disorder Service, we used to run a binge eating and a bulimia group. And actually the dietitians even used to come in and do sessions 3 and 4 used to all be
Amazing.
about the regular eating, balancing blood sugar, all the rest of it, and I think in an ideal world, it would be great to have had even more dietetic input. But I think, I mean, I'm totally with you in a way. Like you can talk about your relationship with your mother till the cows come home in a way. But if you're eating 800 calories a day and you are like, yeah, avoiding carbohydrates, and no wonder you're binge eating. So, I mean, it's a fundamental puzzle piece, isn't it? And I would say to my clients in a way, like, irregular eating is like the foundation. Your eating is the foundation. Once you've got that stable block in place, then you can do more of the emotional work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And
and I
like
sort of think with cognitive
mm,
behavior therapy as well, I sort of think Christopher Fairbairn's work and stuff, like, um, I do believe, I think that sort of acknowledges the regular eating, doesn't it? I don't know how much when
it
he
does.
runs his programs, he would have a
Mm.
dietitian on board, but I think um,
Well,
some
I
of the
know
cognitive
because I've done a
behavior.
deep dive into his.
Okay, for God's sake.
Well, no, I've never engaged with him and I've never like seen any of the content of his programs, but just from his book, because the book Overcoming Binge Eating is the most cited self-help manual for binge eating disorder, and self-help is actually the first line of advice for someone with binge eating disorder. It's the first treatment that's provided. So I have gone through that book in extensive detail, and yes, that you're right. Like regular eating is in there, and like there are some tips about, choose your portions based on what your family and friends are having, and avoid long periods of food, and that's all really great. And I'm glad that it's in there. But can you imagine how amazing it would be if a dietitian was involved in writing that text and could expand on those points even more? Um, because I'm assuming, don't know, but I'm guessing Christopher Fairburn, as a psychiatrist, incredible as he is and has added so much to this field, does not know how many carbohydrates someone needs to eat in a day, or the downfalls of not eating carbs until lunchtime, and that's fine. That's not his gig. But let's bring a dietitian in to complement that work, to fill in some of those gaps. Um, and that will make a self-help manual like that even better.
Yeah, no, so true. Well, I guess it's just really emphasizing, isn't it? We need the whole holistic kind of
Exactly.
package, really. And
Yeah.
dietetics is really important. And I think the take-home message really for the listeners as well, isn't it? It's like actually the eating part is quite essential in overcoming binge eating. You can do a lot of psychology, but the nutritional piece is vital.
It's
Um,
vital. And as well, because the person themselves, like when a client comes to me and they want to work with me, they're like, I don't really know how you can help me because I know what I should be doing. And I say, okay, that's interesting. Can you tell me what you think you should be doing? I should be having like 30 grams of oats for breakfast at 8 o'clock. At 2 o'clock for lunch, I should be having like some eggs with some tomatoes and some veg. And at dinner, I should be having this. And then it's very clear to me that actually what you think you should be doing is incredibly distorted. And I can only guess where you got that from social media, from what I eat in a day videos, from what it looks like other people around you are doing. sometimes the person themselves also needs that support to really regulate their eating and dismantle those rules that they think are serving them. They think they should be able to follow and are beating themselves up when they fall flat into a bag of granola at 6 p.m. So professionals, for patients, for everybody, we just need, you know, dietetics as a profession, it's very under theorized. We're doing good work, but we need to do more to raise our profile and how we can help, because we can help a lot.
Well, we look forward to your book, Jo.
Thank you.
So say a bit more as well about your new writing platform and
Mhm.
how people can subscribe to that and yeah, keep updated on all the binge eating stuff in the
Yeah.
out there.
Sure. So I do have a podcast called the Binge Eating Dietitian podcast, but I haven't brought out new episodes in a while. And I was reflecting on why that is. And I'm still not entirely sure, but I just have this barrier when it comes to sitting in front of the mic. I just can't get the words out or formulate an argument. I don't know. So I said, okay, I'm going to pause the podcast for a bit, even though all the episodes are there. So please go and enjoy them. There's like over 100 episodes. And maybe it's from writing my thesis now. I have this gap in my life of wanting to write. So I decided to set up a new writing platform. I can't even remember the link because it's all new, but you're going to put it in the show notes. And my aim there is to really start conversations about binge eating that bring in that societal impact and how that is affecting people who struggle with binge eating. It's going to be less about hints and tips and things that you can do to overcome it. All that's in the podcast and that's there for you to listen to. But this is more about just kind of shining a light on how society, like I said, about like families or like the word binge eating or what else was it like the healthcare professional stuff and the shame and the stigma and that like how all that is impacting on you and your relationship with food. So I've only started with one essay so far. I have the next one coming very soon. It's about feeding little ones and the work and the mental load and the emotional labor involved in that. So if that's that kind of thing sounds interesting, please do come over and subscribe.
Sure. No, it sounds really great, Jo. And I think that sort of
Mm.
whole social piece, actually, just listening to you, and the more I'm thinking about it as well, I think it's so needed, isn't it? I think what I find such a common problem for many of my clients is, they often have very supportive families that really want to help, but families just do not realize the internalized weight stigma they're carrying, fat
Mhm.
phobia, the good bad foods, all the rest of it. And it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's just like a kind of constant conversation that's going on in the background. And
yeah.
I don't think people realize it's almost like so much the ocean we're swimming in. People
Hmm.
can't really see how
Yeah,
damaging it is sometimes, I think. So
yeah. Until you do see it and then you see it's everywhere. Also,
yes.
another finding, which I forgot to say, which is really cool, is how
Yeah.
people describe like the feeling of being watched all the time. So, and when it comes to eating and making food choices, like the feeling of judgment from others. Um, Again, probably heightened in an Irish context, but still very much applicable everywhere. Just feeling like the judgment and how that kind of pushes people away then, like to go indoors and for it to all happen in secret. Like it just makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I look forward to sharing it all on that platform and it's free to subscribe. I'm just going to put it all out there and hopefully get some good feedback on it. And yeah, start these important conversations.
Okay, fantastic. So I shall put that link in the show notes, Jo. And then
Thank you.
your podcast is the Binge Eating Dietitian for anyone
Hmm.
that wants to go and look that up. And then
Yeah.
Instagram, you
Yep.
are the
At binge.eating.dietitian.
yeah. Okay. And anything else you want to put out there while you're got the chance?
No, I think that's all. But thank you so much for this platform. I haven't spoken about my thesis really much to any, on a public platform like this. Again, it does take a while to get your head around it and like what exactly you've done and put out there. So I feel like just this has helped me to kind of reflect on it and make sense of it all too.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jo, for coming on and for talking about it. And I think it's wonderful to share actually, just in sort of like the celebration of you
Mhm.
kind of going through all of this. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful as well because I guess I've known you since the pandemic.
Hmm.
And
I
yeah, it's just
know.
really lovely just to see
Yeah. Oh,
all
thank
the
you.
things that have happened over the last few years. So yeah,
Yeah.
well done. I know all the listeners will be cheering you on and will be subscribing. Make sure you do,
Mhm.
everyone. So thank you, Joe, so much for coming on the podcast. And yeah, I'll have you back soon, when your book's out, if not before.
All right, Harry. Thank you so much.